He didn't hesitate. In front of 12 board members, 2 investors, and a room full of executives, Daniel Carter raised his hand and struck his wife across the face. The sound cracked through the boardroom like something breaking for good. To him, she was an embarrassment, a woman who didn't belong in his world anymore. What he didn't know was that the out-of-place wife he just humiliated had far more power in that room than he ever would. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 16 months earlier, everything had still looked normal from the outside. Emily Carter lived in a modest apartment on the edge of downtown Chicago. It wasn't small, but it wasn't impressive either. Clean, quiet, predictable. The kind of place no one would associate with power or wealth. That was the point. She stood by the kitchen window that morning, watching Daniel knot his tie in the reflection of the glass. He looked sharp, confident, exactly like the kind of man who belonged in high-level meetings and expensive offices. The kind of man people took seriously. The kind of man who had started to forget her. "You're leaving early again?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Daniel didn't look at her. "Big week. Investors are flying in. I need to stay ahead of everything." Everything. Emily nodded slowly. She had heard that word more often lately. Everything meant the company. Everything meant his ambition. Everything meant everything except her. "I made coffee," she said. "Already grabbed some downstairs," he replied, distracted, scrolling through his phone. There was a pause. Small, quiet, easy to miss. She studied him for a moment longer. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his attention drifted somewhere else, somewhere more important. It wasn't sudden. It had been building for months. "Good luck today," she added. "Yeah," he said, already halfway out the door. "Thanks." The door clicked shut behind him. Emily exhaled. The apartment felt larger without him, empty. She walked back to the kitchen counter and picked up her phone. The screen lit up with a notification she hadn't opened yet. Margaret Chen. She hesitated for just a second before tapping it. The message was brief. "Board requested your confirmation on the Q3 capital allocation. They're waiting." Emily's thumb hovered over the screen. Her reflection stared back at her. Simple clothes, minimal makeup, nothing remarkable. No one looking at her would have guessed she had final approval over a multi-billion-dollar decision. No one except a very small group of people. She typed back calmly. "Approve as submitted. No revisions." 3 dots appeared instantly, then disappeared. Then reappeared. Understood. "Also, Daniel Carter is leading today's presentation. You may want to review." Emily's gaze shifted to the empty doorway where her husband had just left. "I'm aware," she whispered to herself. She locked the phone and set it down. For a moment, she stood there in silence, letting the weight of that contrast settle in. To Daniel, she was a freelance designer who worked from home, someone flexible, replaceable, quiet. He had never asked more, and she had never corrected him, because 16 months ago, Emily had made a decision. Not a careless one, not impulsive, a test. She had watched too many people change when money entered the room. Too many smiles turn into calculations. Too many relationships built on what someone could gain instead of who someone truly was. So she chose to disappear. Not completely, just enough. Enough to see who Daniel really was without the influence of power. At first, it had worked. He had been kind, attentive, grateful. He had looked at her like she mattered. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The higher he climbed, the less he looked down. And now she wasn't sure he saw her at all. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a call. Unknown number. Emily frowned slightly, then answered. "Emily Carter." The voice on the other end was measured, professional. "Ms. Carter, this is Richard Morrison from Apex Holdings. I apologize for contacting you directly, but we've encountered an unexpected concern regarding today's board meeting." Emily's expression didn't change. "I'm listening." There was a brief pause, like the man was choosing his words carefully. "Some internal dynamics may impact how the presentation is received. Given your position, we thought you should be prepared before anything escalates." Emily's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Thank you for the notice," she said. "I'll take that into consideration." She ended the call and stood very still. Internal dynamics. That wasn't a phrase people used lightly. She walked to the window again, looking out over the city. Traffic moved. People rushed. Everything looked ordinary. But something wasn't. She didn't know exactly what Daniel would do in that room later that week. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. He still believed she was powerless. And that belief, that was going to cost him. Miles away, in a glass-walled conference room high above the city, a senior board member glanced at his tablet, then slowly looked up toward the empty chair reserved at the end of the table. His expression wasn't curious, it wasn't confused. It was cautious, almost afraid. Emily didn't move from the window for a long time after the call ended. The city kept moving like nothing had shifted. Cars flowed through intersections. People crossed streets with coffee cups in hand. Everything looked ordinary. But something beneath it wasn't. She turned back toward the apartment, her expression calm, controlled. That had always been her advantage. She didn't react too quickly. She didn't let emotion decide for her. That was why she still hadn't said anything to Daniel. Not about the distance. Not about the late nights. Not about the quiet signs that had started to stack up into something harder to ignore. Instead, she had watched, listened, waited. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a secure email notification. She picked it up and opened it immediately. A formal update from Whitmore Holdings. Subject line: final confirmation required, board authority. Her eyes scanned the contents quickly. 3 major capital movements pending approval. 2 acquisitions, 1 internal restructuring. All of it routed through the same structure she had personally designed. Her approval. Always her approval. Emily walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room and sat down. The laptop waiting there looked ordinary, like everything else in her life. No branding. No sign of the network it connected to. She logged in. Multiple layers of authentication passed silently. Within seconds, the screen shifted from a blank desktop into something very different. Financial dashboards, ownership layers, voting structures. Everything hidden behind names that didn't trace back to her. At least not easily. She leaned back slightly, reading through the summary again. Daniel's division was highlighted in one section: performance metrics, growth projections, investor confidence. On paper, he looked impressive, promising. Exactly the kind of executive people would back. If they didn't know who was actually holding the foundation together. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. Then she clicked, approved, just like that. A quiet decision that would move $1 million without anyone in that boardroom knowing who had made it. She closed the laptop slowly. For a moment, something like disappointment flickered across her face. Not because of the business, because of him. Daniel had never asked how things worked behind the scenes. He had never questioned how quickly doors opened for him, how easily funding appeared, how investors seemed unusually confident. He just accepted it. And lately, he had started acting like he deserved it. Emily stood and moved toward the bedroom. She opened the closet and reached for a simple jacket. Nothing expensive, nothing that stood out. She had learned a long time ago that invisibility wasn't about what you wore. It was about how people chose to see you. And Daniel had made his choice. Her phone rang again as she slipped the jacket on. This time, she recognized the number: Margaret. Emily answered without hesitation. "Yes, you approved the allocation," Margaret said. No greeting, no wasted words. "I did," a brief pause. "You're still planning to stay out of direct involvement?" Margaret asked carefully. Emily walked toward the door, her tone even. "For now, Emily," Margaret continued, softer this time. "Today's meeting, there are concerns, not just financial, behavioral." Emily's grip tightened slightly around her phone. "I'm aware. You've given him a lot of room," Margaret said. "More than most would." That was the point. "And if he fails?" Margaret asked. Emily stepped into the hallway and locked the door behind her. Then I stopped waiting. Silence filled the line for a second. Margaret understood what that meant. "Do you want me there?" she asked yet. Understood. The call ended. Emily slipped her phone into her bag and walked toward the elevator. Her steps were steady, controlled. But inside, something had shifted. Not broken, just clearer. She had given Daniel time. Opportunity. Trust. Now she was starting to question whether he had mistaken all of that for weakness. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. As they closed, her reflection stared back at her again. Same simple clothes, same quiet presence, but behind that reflection was a structure no one in her life had fully seen. Not even the man she had married, especially not him. The elevator descended smoothly, each floor passing without interruption. By the time it reached the lobby, Emily had already made one decision. Small, but real. She wasn't going to stay completely invisible anymore, not today. Outside, the air was colder than she expected. She adjusted her jacket and started walking down the street. Her destination wasn't far. A building Daniel would recognize instantly. Glass exterior, clean lines, corporate precision, Patterson Technologies. She stopped across the street for a moment, watching employees move in and out. Confident, busy, focused on the future they believed they were building. A future she had already shaped without them knowing. Her phone buzzed again, a text this time, from Daniel. "Don't come by today. It's not a good look with investors here." Emily stared at the message. Read it again, then once more. Not a good look. Her lips pressed into a thin line. There it was, not concern, not care. Image. She typed back slowly. "I understand." Then she hit send, and crossed the street anyway. Inside the lobby, the receptionist looked up as Emily approached. The woman's expression shifted for just a fraction of a second. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. Recognition, not of her face, of something else. "Good morning," the receptionist said, a little too carefully. Emily offered a small nod. Morning. She didn't check in, didn't sign anything, just walked toward the elevators. No one stopped her. Behind the desk, the receptionist reached for the phone almost immediately, dialing a number with quiet urgency. Upstairs, in a glass-walled conference room, one of the board members glanced down at his own phone as it vibrated. His expression changed, slowly. Then he looked up, not at Daniel, at the empty chair at the far end of the table, and for the first time that morning he didn't look confident. He looked like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Daniel didn't notice the shift in the room right away. He stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room, one hand resting on the edge of the table, the other holding a remote. Slides moved behind him in clean, confident transitions. Growth charts, revenue projections, expansion plans. Everything looked sharp, controlled, convincing. He spoke with ease, his voice steady, measured, the kind of tone that made investors lean in instead of pull back. He had practiced this, refined it, built himself into the kind of man who belonged in rooms like this, and today he believed he owned it. At the far end of the table, one chair remained empty. Daniel didn't question it, not really. Board members came and went. Some attended remotely, others sent proxies. It wasn't unusual, but the way a few of them kept glancing toward that chair, that was different. Based on our current trajectory, Daniel continued, clicking to the next slide. We're positioned to close the quarter with a 23% increase in overall valuation. Assuming continued investor confidence, we can accelerate. His voice trailed for just a fraction of a second as the door opened. Not wide, just enough to shift the air in the room. Several heads turned immediately. Daniel didn't, not at first. He kept going, accelerate expansion into 2 additional markets before year-end, which Daniel. The interruption was soft, calm, but it carried. He stopped, slowly turned, and saw her. Emily stood just inside the doorway, one hand still resting lightly against it. She hadn't changed much since that morning. Same simple jacket, same quiet presence, but she wasn't supposed to be here. His expression tightened instantly. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not bothering to hide the irritation in his voice. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Emily didn't react to his tone. She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. "I thought I'd stop by," she said. "You said it was an important meeting. That's exactly why you shouldn't be here," Daniel replied. Sharper now. "We have investors in the room." "I can see that." Her eyes moved across the table briefly. Not lingering, just noticing. One of the board members straightened in his seat when her gaze passed over him. Daniel noticed that, and it annoyed him more than it should have. "This isn't a good time," he said. "If you need something, you can wait." Emily took another step forward. "I won't take long." Her voice stayed even, controlled. That made it worse. There was no apology in it, no hesitation, just presence. Daniel exhaled through his nose, already losing patience. Emily, I'm in the middle of a presentation, and I'm not interrupting it, she said quietly. I'm just here. The room went still. Not tense, not yet. But something had shifted. Amanda, seated halfway down the table, leaned back slightly in her chair. Her expression was calm, but her eyes moved between them with quiet interest. Daniel caught that look, and something in him snapped tighter. This wasn't just about Emily being out of place, it was about how it made him look. Listen, he said, lowering his voice, but not enough to keep others from hearing. This isn't appropriate. You can't just walk into a board meeting like this. Emily met his gaze. I didn't think I needed permission to be here. That line landed harder than she intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. A couple of the investors exchanged a glance. Daniel felt it, the shift, the subtle movement of attention away from him, toward her, and he didn't like it. You don't, he said, forcing a tight smile, but you do need to understand how this works. This is a professional environment, I know. The answer came too quickly, too simply. It sounded like a correction. Daniel's jaw tightened, he said. Silence followed. Not loud, but heavy. Emily didn't move, didn't argue. She simply stood there, absorbing the words. Then she nodded once. All right, she said softly. And for a second, Daniel thought that was it, that she would leave, that the moment would pass. But she didn't turn toward the door. Instead, she stepped further into the room, toward the table, toward him. And that's when Daniel noticed something else. A folder in her hand. Plain, unmarked. He frowned slightly. What's that? Something you might want to look at, she replied. His patience snapped. I don't have time for this right now. You might want to make time. The room stilled again. This time it was sharper, more focused. Daniel laughed once under his breath, shaking his head. No, what I need is for you to stop doing this, showing up like this, making things awkward in front of people who actually matter. The words came out faster now, harsher, more exposed. Emily didn't flinch, but something in her eyes changed, not hurt, not anger, something quieter, colder. Actually, she said, I think I matter here more than you realize. A few heads lifted at that. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving breath. Emily, his voice dropped. Warning. Now, don't do this. Then don't dismiss me, she said. There it was, a line. Small, but real, and Daniel stepped right over it. This isn't about dismissing you, he said. It's about understanding your place. You don't belong in this room. Not like this. The words hung there, clear, sharp, final. Across the table, one of the board members lowered his gaze. Another leaned back slightly, tension visible in his shoulders. Amanda's lips curved just a little. Emily stood very still. Then she looked down at the folder in her hand. Opened it, just enough to glance at the top page. Her thumb brushed lightly across the edge, as if confirming something. Then she closed it again and looked back up at Daniel. All right, she said quietly. Her tone was different now, resolved. I understand. She turned, walked toward an empty chair along the wall, and sat down. Not leaving, not arguing, just staying. Daniel stared at her for a second, caught between irritation and something he couldn't quite name. Then he forced himself to turn back to the screen. Let's continue, he said, his voice tighter than before. He clicked the next slide, but the room didn't settle the way it had earlier. Eyes still drifted, not to the data, to her. And at the far end of the table, the board member who had received the message earlier glanced down at his phone again. Another notification had just come through. He read it once, then slowly lifted his head. And this time, when he looked at Emily, he didn't look cautious. He looked certain. Daniel kept talking, but the rhythm was gone. He clicked through the slides faster now, words blending together in a way they hadn't before. He felt it, even if he refused to acknowledge it fully. The room wasn't with him anymore. They were watching, not just him. Her. Every time Emily shifted slightly in her chair, every time she adjusted the folder in her lap, action, subtle, but constant. Daniel forced a smile as he continued. And with the projected increase in regional demand, we expect to secure an additional Daniel. This time it wasn't Emily, it was Richard Morrison. Daniel stopped again, irritation rising. Yes? Richard leaned forward slightly, his phone still in his hand. Before you continue, I think there's something we need to clarify. Daniel's jaw tightened. We can address questions at the end. I don't think this can wait. The tone was different now, not aggressive, but firm. Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. Fine. What is it? Richard glanced briefly toward Emily before looking back at him. This presentation, the capital assumptions you're working from, where did those approvals come from? Daniel frowned. From the board, obviously. Which member? Richard pressed. A small ripple moved through the room. Daniel's irritation sharpened. That information is internal. So is the funding structure, another investor added quietly. But we're all seeing updates that don't quite align with what you're presenting. Daniel blinked. What are you talking about? No one answered immediately. Instead, several people looked down at their phones at the same time. Susan stretched. Daniel felt it tighten around him. What updates? He demanded. Richard turned his phone around slightly, just enough for Daniel to see the subject line. Capital allocation. Final approval confirmed. Daniel's stomach tightened. That's standard, he said quickly. We finalize approvals before meetings like this. Of course, Richard said, but usually we know who's giving them. Daniel opened his mouth, then paused. He knew the structure. He had explained it dozens of times. The layered approvals, the holding entities, the voting distribution. But the final authority, that part had always been vague, handled above him, handled quietly. Those approvals come through the holding group, Daniel said, more carefully now. Yes, Richard replied, and who controls that group? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He felt it now, the gap, the one he had never bothered to question before. It's managed through multiple channels, he said finally. That's how large structures work. Richard held his gaze for a moment longer, then slowly leaned back. Right. The word lingered, not agreement, just acknowledgement. Daniel turned back to the screen, trying to regain control. If there are no further interruptions, I'd like to finish, actually, another board member said. Quieter, but just as firm. There's one more thing. Daniel's grip tightened around the remote. What? The man hesitated, then looked directly at Emily. You've been very quiet, he said. The shift was immediate. All eyes moved to her. Emily didn't look surprised. She met his gaze calmly, her posture unchanged. I didn't realize I was expected to speak, she said. You're here, he replied, and given the circumstances, I think your perspective might be relevant. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving breath. Her perspective? He laughed under his breath. She's not part of this. Emily didn't react to that, but the room did. Small movements, subtle shifts. People were paying closer attention now, not dismissing her, listening. That's not what I've been told, Richard said. The words landed harder than anything before. Daniel's head snapped toward him. What does that mean? Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his phone again. Another notification had come through. He read it, then exhaled slowly. Daniel, he said, I think you should take a moment before continuing. Daniel's patience broke. No. I think what's happening here is people are getting distracted by things that don't matter. He turned sharply toward Emily. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Blame. Dismissal. Public. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice harder now. This isn't your world. You don't understand how any of this works. The room went still. Emily looked at him, really looked at him this time. Not as his wife, not as someone trying to keep the peace, but as someone measuring him. Then she stood, slowly, deliberately. The movement drew every eye in the room. She didn't rush, didn't speak immediately. She walked toward the table, the folder still in her hand. Daniel watched her, irritation mixing with something less defined now. Unease. What are you doing? He asked. Emily stopped across from him, close enough that he could see the calm in her expression. The lack of hesitation. I think, she said quietly. It's time I stopped sitting on the sidelines. Daniel shook his head, a short, sharp motion. No. What you need to do is step back and let me handle this. Emily tilted her head slightly. As you've been handling everything else? The question was soft, but it cut. Daniel's face flushed. Don't do this here. Then where? She asked. He didn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer. Emily looked down at the folder again, opened it. This time, she didn't just glance at it. She slid one document out, set it gently on the table. Not in front of Daniel. In the center, where everyone could see. The room leaned in without meaning to. Daniel frowned, stepping closer. What is that? Emily didn't respond immediately. She simply placed her hand lightly on the paper, holding it there, as if deciding something, as if this moment mattered more than anything that had come before. Then she looked up. Not at Daniel. At the room. At the people who suddenly seemed very aware that something bigger was unfolding. You asked where the approvals came from, she said. Her voice was calm, clear. Teal felt something drop in his chest, a realization. Not complete, not yet, but close enough to make him uncomfortable. Emily's fingers lifted slightly from the document, just enough to reveal the signature line at the bottom. Not fully, not yet. Daniel stepped closer, his voice lower now. Tense. Emily, what are you doing? She turned her gaze back to him, and for the first time since she had walked into that room, there was no softness left in it. I'm correcting a misunderstanding. The room held its breath, and Daniel suddenly realized he had no idea what she was about to say next. No one moved. The air in the room shifted, thick and sharp, as if something invisible had just been placed on the table alongside that document. Daniel stared at Emily, his pulse picking up in a way he couldn't explain. You're not correcting anything, he said, forcing control back into his voice. You're creating confusion. Emily didn't look at him. Her attention stayed on the others. That's already been done, she said, a quiet response. But it landed. Richard Morrison leaned forward again, his gaze locked on the document in the center of the table. Would you mind explaining what we're looking at? Daniel cut in immediately. She doesn't need to explain anything. This isn't. It's relevant, Richard said, not raising his voice, but not backing down either. That stopped Daniel. Not because of what was said. No hesitation, no deference. That wasn't how people spoke to him in this room. Not anymore. Emily finally shifted her gaze back to Daniel. Do you want to see it? She asked. Something in her tone made the question feel less like an offer, and more like a line being drawn. Daniel exhaled sharply. Fine. He reached for the paper. Let's get this over with. His fingers brushed the edge of the document. For a moment, Emily didn't let go. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but he felt it. Then she released it. Daniel pulled the paper closer, scanning it quickly at first, then slower, then again. The irritation in his expression began to change, not vanish, just shift. What is this? He asked. A summary, Emily replied, of the last capital approval cycle. I know what it is, Daniel snapped. I'm asking why you have it. Emily held his gaze. Because I reviewed it. A small murmur moved through the room. Daniel laughed once, short and dismissive. Reviewed it? Emily, you don't even work here. Not publicly. The words were quiet, but they landed harder than anything she had said so far. Daniel's smile faded. What does that mean? Emily didn't answer immediately. She reached into the folder again and pulled out a second document. This one thicker, more detailed. She set it beside the first. Look at the approval chain, she said. Daniel didn't want to, but he did. His eyes moved across the page, following the structure he already knew. Initial review, secondary validation, holding group confirmation. Everything looked familiar until the last line, the final authorization. He frowned. The name wasn't listed, just a signature block. Encrypted, masked, the same way it always was. That's standard, he said quickly. Final approvals are anonymized. For most people, Emily said. Daniel looked up sharply. What is that supposed to mean? Across the table, Amanda shifted slightly in her seat. Her expression was still composed, but her attention had sharpened. She was watching now, not just observing, evaluating. Emily stepped closer to the table, close enough that Daniel could see the calm in her face, the lack of doubt. You've been working with this structure for over a year, she said. Did you ever wonder why no one questioned your numbers? Daniel's jaw tightened. Because they make sense. Because they're backed, she corrected. The difference was small. But it mattered. He shook his head. This isn't going anywhere. You're reading too much into internal processes you don't understand. Emily's expression didn't change. I understand them very well. There it was again. That certainty. Not defensive. Not emotional. Just factual. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. You're out of line, Daniel said, his voice dropping. This isn't your place. Emily met his gaze steadily. You keep saying that, and it's still true. A pause. Then she nodded once. All right. She reached for the first document again, turned it slightly, not enough to reveal everything, just enough to shift the angle, to show the bottom corner more clearly, where the authorization code sat. Daniel followed the movement without meaning to, his eyes locked onto the code. A string of characters he had seen before. Dozens of times, every time a major approval went through. He had never questioned it, it wasn't his job. But now something about it felt different, familiar. Not in the way numbers are familiar, in the way patterns are. "Where did you get this?" he asked, more quietly now. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Have you ever tried to trace it?" He frowned. "Trace what?" "The final authority," she said. "The one signing off on everything you present." Daniel's patience flared again, but weaker this time. "That's not how this works. It is if you know where to look." The room leaned in again, not physically, but mentally, attention tightening around every word. Daniel shook his head. "No, you're guessing. You're pulling pieces together and pretending they mean something." Emily's lips pressed together briefly. Then she reached into her bag. Not the folder, something else. Her phone. She unlocked it, tapped twice, then turned the screen toward him. "Then explain this." Daniel hesitated, then stepped closer. On the screen was an email. Short. Formal. The kind that moved quietly through upper channels. He read the sender first. Whitmore Holdings. The name meant something. He knew it did. He just couldn't place why. Then he read the subject. "Final approval confirmed, per direct instruction." His eyes moved down, to the line beneath. "Authorized by." The rest of the text was cut off. Emily's thumb hovered just above the screen, not revealing the full name, not yet. Daniel felt it then. Not understanding, not fully. But the first crack in it. "Emily," he said slower now, "what are you trying to prove?" She looked at him, and this time there was no softness left at all. "I'm not trying to prove anything." Her voice was steady, certain. "I'm giving you a chance to see it before everyone else does." A silence fell over the room, heavy, expectant. Across the table, Richard Morrison's phone buzzed again. He looked down, read the message, and then very slowly stood up. "Daniel," he said, his voice measured but unmistakably serious. "I think we're past the point of assumptions." Daniel turned toward him, frustration rising again. "What does that mean?" Richard held up his phone, the screen visible to the entire table. A new notification. From the same sender, Whitmore Holdings. Subject line, "Full ownership disclosure, emergency board update." And for the first time since Emily had walked into that room, Daniel felt something close to fear. The room didn't breathe, not a single movement, not a chair shifting, not a pen tapping, not even the quiet rustle of paper. All eyes were on Richard's phone, then on Emily, then back to Daniel. Daniel felt it closing in. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice sharper now, louder than he intended. "Another email? That doesn't mean anything." No one agreed. No one disagreed. They just watched. Richard didn't sit down. He kept holding the phone up, his gaze steady. "It means we're about to receive full documentation," he said. "Ownership structure, authority chain. Everything that's been unclear." Daniel laughed again, but this time it didn't sound convincing. "Unclear?" "There's nothing unclear. The structure is standard." "For public companies," someone murmured. "This isn't public," another voice added. Daniel turned toward them, frustration rising. "You all signed off on this model." "Yes," Richard said, "we signed off on the performance, not the source." That landed, hard. Daniel's grip tightened around the document still in his hand. "The source is the holding group. That hasn't changed." Emily stepped forward again. Not aggressively, just enough to shift the space. "The source has never been the issue," she said. "The question has always been control." Daniel shook his head. "You keep saying things like that as if they mean something." "They do." The simplicity of the answer made it worse. He turned toward her fully now, irritation cutting through the uncertainty. "Then explain it. Go ahead, since you've decided to make yourself part of this." Emily didn't rush. She let the silence stretch just long enough. Then she reached for the document in Daniel's hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. She took it back, turned it fully, and slid it across the table so everyone could see. The signature line, clear now, no longer hidden, no longer angled, the name visible, not encrypted, not masked, real. A ripple moved through the room like something breaking under the surface. Daniel didn't look at it immediately. He looked at her, waiting, expecting something else, some explanation, some correction. There wasn't one. Slowly, his eyes dropped, to the paper, to the name. He read it once, then again. His expression didn't change right away. It just stalled, as if his mind refused to process what it was seeing. "That's not," he started, then stopped. He looked up at her, then back down again. That's not possible. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Across the table, Amanda leaned forward slightly, her earlier confidence slipping just enough to show something else underneath. Uncertainty. "What is it?" she asked, her voice controlled but tighter than before. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Richard stepped closer, glancing at the document. Then he exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, almost under his breath, "that answers the question." Several others reached for the paper, looking, confirming, cross-checking with the notification on their phones. The pieces were lining up, too cleanly, too precisely. Daniel shook his head again, more forcefully now. "No, this is a mistake." "There's no way there is," Emily said quietly. He snapped his gaze back to her. "You don't get to say that like you know what you're talking about." She held his stare, unmoved. "I do know." The room tightened again. Daniel felt something slipping, not just control, certainty. The foundation he had been standing on. "You're reading a name on a document," he said, his voice rising slightly. "That doesn't mean anything. People sign things all the time. That doesn't make them the final authority." Emily finished for him. He stopped. Because that was exactly what he had been about to say, and she had said it first, calmly, like she had been waiting for him to catch up. "That's not how this works," he said, but the conviction wasn't there anymore. "It is," Richard said, stepping in again. "In this structure, the final signature is everything." Daniel turned toward him. "You're just going to accept this, based on one document?" "No," Richard replied, "based on all of them." He lifted his phone again. More notifications now. Emails loading, attachments opening, the same name, repeated, across multiple approvals, multiple quarters, multiple decisions. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked back at the paper, then at Emily, then back again. "You're telling me," he started, his voice slower now, struggling to form the thought, "that this whole time..." He couldn't finish it, because finishing it meant accepting it, and he wasn't ready. Emily stepped closer. Close enough that only he could hear her next words clearly. "You built your career on decisions you never questioned," she said. His breath caught. "You trusted the results," she continued, "but you never looked at the source." He stared at her, saw something he hadn't before, not just calm, not just control, authority. It had been there the whole time. He just hadn't recognized it. "That doesn't make sense," he said, quieter now. You're not." "What?" she asked. He didn't answer, because he didn't know what word to use. Emily straightened slightly, turned away from him, and addressed the room. "You've all been asking the same question," she said. "Who approves the capital? Who controls the holding group? Who has final authority?" No one interrupted. No one looked away, and she let the silence hold them there. Then she placed her hand lightly on the document, not claiming it, not presenting it, just anchoring it. "You already have the answer." Across the table, Amanda stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We're all just going to sit here and pretend this means something." Her voice cut through the tension, sharp, defensive. Emily looked at her, calm, measured. "It means everything," she said. Amanda let out a short laugh. "No, what it means is someone is playing a game and you're all falling for it." "Sit down, Amanda," Richard said quietly. That was new. Amanda turned toward him, disbelief flashing across her face. "Excuse me?" I said, "Sit down." This time, there was no softness in it. Amanda hesitated, then slowly lowered herself back into her chair. Daniel watched it happen. Watched the shift, not just in the room. He knew something had moved. And it wasn't moving back. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, he pulled it out, opened the first notification, then the next, then the next. Each one pulling the same thread tighter: ownership, authority, control, all pointing to the same place, the same name. He looked up at Emily, and for the first time since he had met her, he didn't see his wife. He saw a question he didn't know how to answer. "You knew," he said quietly. "All this time you knew." Emily didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. She just looked at him, and that was enough. Across the table, one of the senior board members cleared his throat. "We need to call an official session," he said, "immediately." Richard nodded. Agreed. Another voice followed, all voting members present. Amanda's head snapped toward Daniel. "You're not seriously letting this happen." Daniel didn't respond, because he couldn't. Because for the first time he wasn't sure what authority he actually had. The senior member turned toward Emily. "Will you be staying?" he asked carefully. A pause, a small one, but it carried weight. Emily glanced at the document, then at Daniel, then back at the room. "Yes," she said. The word settled over everything. Final, and as the board members began to gather themselves, pulling up documents, preparing for something far more formal, Daniel realized something that made his stomach drop. This meeting was no longer his. The tone of the room changed completely. No one was pretending anymore. Folders were opened, phones stayed in hands, screens lit up with documents that were no longer theoretical. The structure that had always been abstract, layers, approvals, invisible authority, was now sitting in plain view. And it all pointed to the same place. Daniel stood at the center of it, but he wasn't leading anymore. He was trying to catch up. "This doesn't make sense," he said again, but the words sounded weaker now. "There has to be some kind of error in the documentation." "There isn't," Richard replied, already scrolling through a full ownership report that had just loaded on his screen. "This is verified through 3 independent filings." Daniel shook his head. "That doesn't prove anything about her." He gestured toward Emily. Sharper now, trying to regain ground. "You're all jumping to conclusions." Emily didn't respond. She had stepped back slightly, giving the table space, letting them see it for themselves. That was always her way. She didn't force recognition. She allowed it. Amanda leaned forward, her voice cutting in again. "He's right. This doesn't connect her to anything. It just shows some holding company structure." Richard didn't look up. "Keep reading." "I am reading," Amanda snapped, though her eyes had already dropped to her own phone again. A few seconds passed. Then her expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A flicker of something that didn't belong in the confidence she had been carrying all morning. "This," she started, then stopped. Daniel turned toward her. "What?" Amanda hesitated. That alone was enough to shift something deeper. She never hesitated. "It's layered," she said finally. "Multiple shells. But the controlling interest, it's centralized." "Of course it is," Daniel said quickly. "That's how these structures work." Amanda looked up at him, really looked this time, and for the first time, there was no certainty in her expression. "It's centralized under one entity," she clarified. "One name." Silence followed, heavy, waiting. Daniel's chest tightened again. "Then say it." Amanda didn't. She glanced toward Emily, just for a second, but it was enough. Daniel saw it, felt it, the direction of it. "No," he said immediately. "No, that's not, Daniel." Richard interrupted quietly. "You need to look at this." He turned the tablet around. This time, Daniel didn't resist. He stepped closer, looked. The document was longer, more detailed, a breakdown of ownership across multiple entities, all feeding into a final controlling structure. He followed it line by line, layer by layer, each one narrowing, each one pointing toward the same endpoint, the same name he had seen on the signature. Only now, it wasn't just a name, it was a position, authority, control. He swallowed. "That's," his voice caught slightly, "that's just legal ownership. It doesn't mean operational control." "It does when the voting rights align," Richard said. "They don't always, they do here." Another voice joined in. "Full majority, not partial. And the proxy agreements confirm it," someone else added. Daniel's thoughts started to fragment. He looked up at Emily, standing there, calm, unmoved. "You knew about this," he said, more accusation than question. She didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. The word was simple, but it landed harder than anything else so far. Daniel stepped back slightly. You knew," he repeated. "And you didn't say anything?" Emily's expression didn't change. "You never asked." The truth in it was unbearable. Amanda pushed her chair back again, more forcefully this time. "This is insane," she said. "Even if this structure is real, that doesn't mean she's the one controlling it. There are lawyers, trustees, executives." "There are," Emily said. Amanda turned toward her sharply. "Then where are they? Why isn't anyone else here explaining this?" Emily met her gaze. "They are here." Emily didn't move, didn't point, didn't gesture. She just stood there, and slowly realization began to spread. Not all at once, but enough. Daniel felt it hit him first. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to make his stomach drop again. "You're saying he started, then stopped, because the words refused to come out." Emily didn't help him. She let him struggle with it, let him try to piece together something he had never bothered to look for. Richard set his tablet down slowly. "We should proceed with formal confirmation," he said to the rest of the board. "This isn't something we speculate on." A few heads nodded. Papers shifted. Phones remained active. The process was moving forward. Without Daniel, without his control. Amanda looked between them, her frustration turning sharper. "You're all overreacting. This is a paperwork issue. It can be clarified." "It is being clarified," Richard replied. Daniel stepped forward again, closer to Emily now. "If you knew about this, didn't you tell me?" His voice dropped, rougher now. "Why let me build everything thinking that it was yours?" she finished. He flinched, just slightly, but it was visible. "I built this company," he said, pushing back. "I did the work. I secured the investors." "You were supported," Emily said, "by anonymous funding," he shot back. "That's not the same thing. It is when the source is consistent." Daniel shook his head, his voice rising again. "No. That's not how this works. You don't just show up with documents and, Daniel." This time the interruption came from someone older, one of the senior board members, the kind who rarely spoke without reason. Daniel turned. The man's expression was calm but firm. "You need to stop talking," he said. The words landed like a quiet command, not loud, not aggressive, but final. Daniel stared at him, unbelieving. "I'm trying to understand what's happening," he said. "And you will," the man replied, "but not like this." A pause. Then, "Right now we need to verify authority," the word hung there. Authority, not performance, not presentation, not growth. Authority. And suddenly, none of Daniel's slides mattered anymore. The senior member turned toward Emily. His tone shifted. Careful, respectful. "Before we proceed," he said, "there's one question we need answered directly." The room stilled again, everyone watching, waiting. Emily didn't move, didn't rush. The man continued. "Are you prepared to formally confirm your position within this structure?" Daniel's breath caught. The question hit harder than anything else so far, because it wasn't speculation. It wasn't theory, it was a line, a moment, a decision. And for the first time, everything depended on what she chose to say next. Emily looked at the table, at the documents, at the spool who had spent months trusting numbers without ever questioning the hand behind them. Then she looked at Daniel. Just once. Long enough for him to understand something he hadn't before. This had never been about money. It had always been about choice. Then she turned back to the room and opened her mouth to answer. Emily didn't rush her answer. She let the silence settle first. Let them sit with the weight of the question. Authority wasn't something you claimed lightly, not in a room like this, not with stakes like these. Daniel felt every second of it. "Emily," he said, his voice lower now, controlled but strained. "Whatever this is, you don't have to." "Yes," she said. The word cut through him. Simple, uncomplicated, final. "I'm prepared to confirm it." The room didn't react loudly. There were no gasps, no sudden movements, just shift, subtle, but absolute. Daniel stared at her as if the space between them had changed shape. "That's not," he started, then stopped, because nothing he could say would undo what had just happened. Richard moved first. He straightened, nodding once, already transitioning into something more formal. "Then we proceed with verification." A few others followed his lead, opening documents, aligning screens, preparing for protocol. This wasn't chaos anymore, it was process, and Daniel wasn't leading it. Emily stepped forward, not toward him, but toward the table, toward the center. Her movements were measured, deliberate, not dramatic, but they carried weight. "I'll cooperate fully," she said. "You'll have access to everything you need to confirm." "Through counsel?" One of the members asked. "Yes, right on cue." The door opened, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to draw attention. A woman stepped in, mid-40s, composed, professional. Margaret. She didn't look surprised by the room, or the tension. Her eyes moved once across the table, taking in the setup, the documents, the positions of each person. Then she nodded slightly. "Apologies for the interruption," she said. "I believe I was expected." Richard exhaled quietly. "You were." Daniel turned toward Emily sharply. "You called a lawyer?" Emily didn't look at him. "I prepared." The distinction stung. Margaret stepped forward, placing a leather folder on the table with quiet precision. "We've brought full documentation of ownership structure, voting rights, and authorization history. All notarized, all verifiable." Amanda's composure cracked just a little. "This is excessive." "No," Margaret said calmly. This is necessary. She opened the folder, turned it toward the board. Everything you've received digitally is backed here, she continued, including cross-referenced filings and trust agreements. Daniel felt his chest tighten again. Trust agreements. He hadn't even known there were trusts involved. How long? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. No one answered immediately. Emily finally looked at him. Since before you started, she said. The words hit harder than anything else, and before, not during, not recently. That's not possible, he said again, but now it sounded like something he was trying to convince himself of. You built the company, she said, but you didn't build the foundation. The room absorbed that? Not as accusation, as fact. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, then stopping. So what? This was all what? Some kind of experiment? Emily didn't respond right away. Margaret did. It was a structure designed for discretion, she said. What you chose to do within that structure was entirely your own. Daniel turned back to Emily. You let me think it was mine. I let you act, she corrected. And watched? He pressed. Yes. There was no apology in it, no hesitation, just truth. Amanda stood again, sharper this time. This is absurd. Even if she has some legal claim, that doesn't mean she gets to walk in here, and she doesn't need to walk in, Richard interrupted. She was already here, and Amanda froze. The meaning landed, not physically, but structurally. Daniel saw it happen, saw the exact moment Amanda realized the ground had shifted beneath her too. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So what now? He asked, quieter now. What does this actually change? No one answered immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't just about ownership. It was about control, authority, decision-making. Margaret closed the folder slightly. That depends on how the board proceeds, she said. The senior member nodded. We move to immediate review of executive authority. Daniel's head snapped toward him. What does that mean? It means, the man said calmly, that we evaluate whether current leadership aligns with controlling ownership. Daniel took a step forward. I am current leadership. For now, Richard added, 2 words and everything behind them. Daniel looked around the room, at faces that had supported him, backed him, deferred to him. And now they were calculating, reassessing, repositioning. Amanda moved closer to him, her voice low. Say something, she whispered. Push back. Daniel didn't, because for the first time, he didn't know what leverage he actually had. Emily stood still, watching, not gloating, not satisfied. Just steady. She hadn't come here to humiliate him. She had come to stop pretending. That was all. The senior member glanced at Margaret. We'll need confirmation of voting control. Margaret nodded once. It's outlined in Section 4. Papers shifted again, eyes moved. Numbers were checked, percentages calculated. Daniel felt each second stretch longer than the last. Then Richard looked up and said it. Majority. The word settled into the room like a verdict. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. Just a second. When he opened them again, he looked at Emily. Not with anger, not even with disbelief anymore. With something else. Realization. You could have ended this any time, he said quietly. Emily didn't deny it. Yes, and you didn't. No. Why? The question hung there, not for the board. For her. Emily held his gaze. You hadn't finished showing me who you were. The truth in it cut deeper than anything else. Daniel stepped back slightly. Not from her. From the moment. From what it meant. Across the table, the senior member cleared his throat again. We'll proceed with a formal vote regarding executive position. Amanda's head snapped toward him. You can't do that in one meeting. We can initiate it, he replied. Another voice added, and suspend authority pending outcome. That was worse. Daniel's focus snapped back. Suspend? On what grounds? On uncertainty of alignment, Richard said. Which we now have. Daniel looked around again, searching for support, for resistance, for anything. He didn't find it. And that was when his phone buzzed again. He almost ignored it. Almost. Then he looked down. One message. From an unknown number. He opened it. A single line. We need to talk. About Amanda. Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. Slowly he looked up. Not at the board. At her. And for the first time, a different kind of fear set in. Not about losing the company, but about what else he didn't know. The vote didn't take long. It never did, once the outcome was already clear. By the time the final count was confirmed, the room had settled into something quieter. Not tension, not shock, just acceptance. Daniel stood still while it happened. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't try to reclaim control, because he couldn't. Effective immediately, Richard said, his voice steady. Daniel Carter is removed from executive authority pending full transition review. The words landed without ceremony. No one reacted dramatically. They didn't need to. Amanda didn't look at him anymore. She was already pulling her chair back, gathering her things with sharp, controlled movements. Not angry, not emotional, just distancing herself. That was the part that hit him harder than anything else. Emily watched it all from where she stood, not at the center, not claiming anything, just present. The room began to shift again. Conversations lowered, papers closed. People started preparing for what came next. Not him, not his vision. Something else. Something that had always been there. Emily turned slightly as Margaret stepped beside her. "We can proceed with formal transition when you're ready," Margaret said quietly. Emily nodded once. "Not today." Margaret studied her for a second, then nodded back. She understood. This wasn't about rushing into control. It was about finishing something. Daniel finally moved. Just a step. Then another, until he stood in front of her again. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that the space between them felt heavier than anything in the room. "I didn't know," he said. The words sounded smaller than he expected. Emily didn't respond. "I thought I understood you," he added, his voice quieter now. "I thought I knew who you were. You knew who I showed you," she said. The truth in it wasn't cruel, but it wasn't gentle either. Daniel swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily held his gaze. Would it have changed anything? He didn't answer, because they both knew. It wouldn't have, not at the beginning, maybe not even later. He looked down for a moment, then back at her. "So that's it?" he asked. "You just take everything?" Emily shook her head slightly. "I'm not taking anything," she said. "I'm keeping what was already mine. That difference mattered." He felt it, understood it. Too late. Around them, the room continued to empty. Board members left in quiet conversations. Assistants gathered materials. The structure of power was already shifting into something new. Daniel stood in the middle of what used to be his, and realized it had never really been his at all. "I built something," he said, almost to himself. Emily nodded. "You did." "But it wasn't enough," he added. She paused. Then it could have been. That was the part that stayed with him. Not the loss. Not the position. That. He looked at her one last time, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. "You're not coming back," he said. It wasn't a question. No hesitation. No softening. Just a boundary. Clear. Daniel nodded, slowly. Then stepped back. There was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to hold on to. He turned and walked toward the door without looking back. This time, no one stopped him. Emily watched him go, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with understanding. Some endings didn't need to be loud to be permanent. Margaret stepped closer again. "Are you sure about not pursuing further action?" she asked quietly. Emily took a breath, then nodded yes. No revenge, no destruction. He had already lost what mattered. She didn't need to take anything else. She turned and walked toward the head of the table. Not to claim it, just to stand there for a moment, to feel it, the space, the silence, the truth. Then she stepped away, toward the door. As she reached it, she paused briefly, not because she was unsure, but because she realized something. For the first time since she had built the life she had been hiding, she didn't have to pretend anymore. Not for him, not for anyone. She opened the door and walked out of the boardroom. Not as someone underestimated, not as someone overlooked, but as herself. And if you've ever had to choose between holding on and walking away, would you have done the same?